Hello, my courageous creators, and welcome to my Creativity Corner. My name is Claire, and today I am so excited to be making art with you. Today, we're going to continue to grow our drawing skills by drawing something very intricate and complex. We're going to be drawing our shoes! So come along and let's explore and experiment together. Here are my shoes. But first, we need to put on our art clothes. All right, I'm ready to get messy. All right, so now let's get started on drawing our shoes. Now the first creative decision I get to make is whether or not I want my drawing to be nice and wide in landscape style or nice and tall in portrait style. I think because my reference photo is already in portrait style where it's nice and tall, I'm going to make my drawing nice and tall as well. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to look at all the beautiful shapes that I see in my shoes. Now these shoes are ballerina shoes and they are kind of crinkly and they have folds in them and they have these beautiful ribbons. So this shape is going to be very, very organic. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the outline shape of these shoes. And this to me looks like a very long oval. It's almost like a really long eggplant. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to hold it very far away from the tip because I want to draw nice and lightly when I do my outlines. If I hold my pencil like I would when I write, very close to the tip, this would be a much darker line. I'd have a lot more control over the pencil. But for now, I want to keep this nice and loose. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my oval. Beautiful. And I want to leave room at the top for all these beautiful ribbons, but I also want to focus on the shoes too. So I think I might make the ribbons a little bit smaller or only focus on part of them. Now, I noticed that this shoe is lower than that shoe. And this shoe here, if I look at the outline, it too is a long oval, but it has this little part that kind of goes to the side too. So I definitely want to think about that. In fact, I'm going to tilt my paper a little bit and I'm going to mark and say, okay, this shoe ends about over here, and then it comes pretty close, but goes a little bit taller over here. And I can measure too with my pencil how long my shoe is. So I notice that this shoe is just about the length of the pencil, which means the shoe next to it is also going to be the length of the pencil. So look at that. That actually is a pretty good length. All right, so now I'm going to do this oval over here. Nice and loose, keeping it really flexible. And I notice that this has a little bit of a flatter point down here and comes a little bit wider. And it goes in a little bit too. These ballerina shoes are very shapely. And then for this top part, it's a little flat, goes off to the side, and then it kind of wrinkles in a little bit too. Beautiful. So we're really starting to get the shape of our shoe. And then I notice over here as well, this one doesn't have as flat of a bottom, but it kind of comes out on the side too. And goes in a little. And then I notice as well, this has an edge that comes out. So I'm going to go ahead and add that as well. And then I notice that this heel sticks out too. And adding in this narrow part is really going to make these shoes look very, very long and elegant. Beautiful. So now I have the basic shape for the outline of my shoes. And I'm going to go ahead and add the basic shape for the ribbons too, just so I know where they are. And I think my artistic decision is I'm going to just capture the essence of the ribbons. I'm not going to do all of the ribbons up there just because there's quite a few of them, but I'm going to make sure that I draw, let's see, I think before I draw the ribbons up here, I'm going to have to do this inside area of my shoe as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start right up here, right where the shoe meets the inside, and I'm going to cut down, and I'm going to add some really beautiful folds in that shoe as well. Because I see that it's not just a straight circle, there are definitely some parts that fold in and some that fold out. And it looks like there's a nice big wide area here, so I'm going to go ahead and end my shoe just about here. And then this is a nice curve that goes in. Maybe this ballerina just took their shoes off. And so when we kind of like take off our shoes, we press into our heel to slide them off. Maybe our ballerina just did that. So that's why these shoes look a little wonky. Beautiful. So now I have the inside of that shoe. And my lines are kind of scraggly right now because I'm just figuring out where everything goes, and that's okay. So now I'm going to measure the width of this area here because I want to get the same width on this shoe too. So I'm going to look at my drawing and say, okay, here is the width of this shoe. I'm going to go over here, now take my finger to mark it off and say, okay, the width of the shoe is about here, right where it ends. And I notice that just like with this shoe, this one over here starts over in this corner. I'm going to bring it down. Again, do those great little waves, those great sort of turns and twists into the sole of the shoe. And we come down, kind of dips down a little bit, and it comes back out. So now I'm holding my pencil a little closer just because I want more control of those lines. And then this comes out here, and we notice that it goes in a little bit, and then it turns out and gets nice and thin. And I'm just doing the big shapes now. I'm not worried about the details. I'm not worried about the textures. Just getting the big shapes. So beautiful. So I have the inside area and I've got the outside area of my shoes. So now I'm going to get those big shapes for the ribbons too. And I notice that my ribbon starts just about here on this shoe. And it kind of swoops down and then up. It actually goes over this part of the shoe, but that's okay. I'm going to clean up my lines a little bit later. And then it kind of curves inward. It can be kind of tricky to see because they're all blended together. They're all this beautiful light pink. So to get ribbons, the really great trick about that is that at some areas I start wide and then I narrow down. And that is going to help us with the shape of the twists and the turns. Beautiful. So now it's your time to experiment and explore getting all of the basic shapes down with your shoes. And then I'll see you for the next step. Beautiful. So now that I've taken some time to clean up my lines and also build out the ribbons for my shoes, it's time for us to work on the details and textures. Now the details are the very, very small lines that give us a little sense of the pop and pow, the little things that make our shoes different and unique from each other. The textures are the lines that give us the feeling of the shoes. Are these shoes furry and soft? Are they hard and leathery? These shoes over here look like they've been worn, so they have all these sort of crinkly texture lines that I'm going to be adding. Let's go ahead and first work on details. So I notice that these shoes have these adorable little bows at the very, very top of the shoes, and they have this inside seam too that I'm going to be adding. So let's go ahead and first do the inside seam that just traces around this inside form that we did earlier. Being careful to make sure that my seam line is just about the same width going all the way around, because that's what it looks like to me in this drawing. or rather in this photograph. Maybe it's a little wider on this side. And notice it goes underneath my ribbons too. Beautiful. So now I'm going to go ahead and work on that bow. And I notice that this bow actually goes over this seam line. And I'm going to erase this part too. And I notice that there's a little loop here, kind of similar to my ribbons in texture and look, but a little bit smaller, a little bit coarser than my ribbons. And then I have this line that comes out quite a ways. It's kind of frayed at the end. And then I have this loop that actually comes out over here too, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that area. It doesn't go quite the height. I actually think this part is a little bit longer too, so I'm going to go ahead and make that just a little bit longer while we're thinking about it. Beautiful. And I notice that this comes about here and goes off to the side. And I'm going to add this top part up here and then the bottom part on the inside to give us that curve. Beautiful. So now I'm going to go ahead and add this bottom part. So I notice that there is a string that comes out over here. It's also a little frayed at the bottom. I'm making these strings a little longer so we can see them a little bit better too. And then this part here, this kind of curves out and up, so that's pretty exciting. So I'm going to have it come down and then swoop up just a little bit. And I'm going to have it curve up, and then I also notice that it curves down like this. Beautiful. So now I have that beautiful little bow, and now I'm going to go ahead and add the texture lines. So I notice that there are some lines over here, kind of faded, crinkly lines, and then they kind of come down here a little bit. Notice that there's a big one over here. Maybe this is where the ballerina is putting the most pressure on their foot. And there's some lines over here too. I notice that there's one kind of up here as well. So these are different than our values. These are just some lines that we're putting in to add a lot of texture. I can add to those later too. Alright, so now it's your turn to add your details and your texture lines, and then I will meet you back up for the last step. Alright, so now we are ready for our last step. We have our beautiful shapes, we have our lovely details and textures. Now it's time for values. Now values are where the light is touching the object and where it's not touching the object. It's the light and dark areas of our object. So on this separate sheet of paper, it can be just a small one. I want you to write out value boxes. And we are going to be making 4 boxes, and each will have a different value in them. So we have value 1, value 2, value 3, and value 4. Now value 1 is our brightest value, where the light is shining the strongest on our object. Value 4 is where the light is not shining on our object at all, so it's super dark. So I'm going to go ahead and color that in. Value 2 is where the light is shining the second brightest. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a nice light layer of pencil. Beautiful. Value 3 is in between value 2 and value 4, so it is the second to darkest value. So I'm going to do another light layer, and then I'm going to come at it from a different angle too to add that second layer. Value is not the same as color. Remember, it's just where the light is shining the brightest on our shoes, and over here where it's not shining very much at all. So we're going to look to have these 4 values in our drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and put these value boxes to the side, and I'm going to first look to see where the light is shining the brightest. Now I notice that my ribbons have a lot of very bright areas, and then over on some of the areas over here on this side of the shoe, and down here the light is shining pretty brightly, and then down over on this area of the shoe. So I'm going to keep that in my mind, and in fact I'm going to do a very light shaded outline area of where those bright spots are. Beautiful. I notice a little bit up here too. Awesome. And then I'm going to skip my bow for now because that's a very little area. I notice that there's also an area of my ribbon over here and an area of my ribbon over here. Beautiful. So everywhere else on this shoe, I'm going to cover with a value 2. I'm just going to put a nice light layer of this value. Notice that my hand is very far away from the tip of my pencil because I want this to be super light. Going nice and even, being really careful to make sure I don't go too dark. Remember, I'm skipping my bow for now because when I do my bow, I want to come back in with a lot of control. I'm always looking at my reference photo too, just to double check to make sure I'm not accidentally covering areas that I don't want covered. And we're building up. It's always easier to go from light to dark than it is to go from dark to light. So we're just going to be building up these layers. Remember, I've got my light area down here, so I'm going to skip that spot. Beautiful. So I already have 2 layers down now on this shoe. I've got my value number 1 and my value number 2. So now I'm actually going to skip ahead and look for value number 4, where the darkest value is. And I notice that in this shoe I have a very dark value right up here, and then I have a little bit of darkness here and some down here at the very tip of the shoe. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that line. It's kind of like an arc. It's like the inside of the sole of the shoe. It goes way up to this tip. It looks like there's a little lighter area here though. Okay, beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in that really dark area. Always looking at my reference picture to make sure that I get the right spots. And now I have my hand very close to the tip of my pencil so I can press down really hard, and so I have a lot of control over my hand. It's always important that when we do darker values we have lots of control because again, it's easier to go from light to dark than it is to go from dark to light. It looks like there's a little area over here that's also nice and dark. Beautiful. So now we're getting some real value changes in here. Alright, so now I'm going to skip down to here. I notice that there's this little triangle area that's nice and dark, that's right under the ribbon. And then I notice that there's some dark sort of spots over here. Beautiful. Now I'm going to leap down here, and it looks like this dark area, well, it looks like first we have a dark area that's right under the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and put that part in. And then now it looks like we have this sort of sharp line that's coming through. And it looks like it kind of cuts over here a little bit. I'm really using my eyes to see the dark areas. I think this section also has some 3s in there too, so I'm going to be mindful of that. And it looks like we have another dark area that comes right up here, right to the very bottom of our bow. Fantastic. It looks like we got some dark areas too that go towards our bow. Beautiful. I also notice that there is a dark value on this side of the seam too. Are there any more dark areas? Really dark? Any more number 4s? Maybe a tiny bit on the inside here. Alright, I think that we're good. So now we have values 1, 2, and 4. Now let's go ahead to value number 3. So this area is going to be, remember, the second to darkest area right here. So my value number 3, I noticed I have some right up here, right where I was putting my 4 before. And I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to do this pretty lightly because I already have a value 2 down, so I don't need to press super hard. And I notice that this kind of comes in. It really just follows mostly where the value 4 was. It's sort of like our transition from 2 to 4. And let's see, I notice that the seam is pretty bright there. And I notice that there's a light spot here. Make sure to keep that nice and light. And if I notice that my value 2 is blending in too much with my value 3, I can always go back in and layer it even more. That's the beauty of layering. You can always add more. You can't add less, but you can always add more. This value 3 carries it pretty far. I notice that there is shadow under where the ribbon is. I notice this ribbon is actually a little darker over here. Maybe this is even like a value 4 that turns a little bit. Beautiful. And then now, looks like there's a value 3 that comes up over here. These values really blend in and out of each other really beautifully. That's a really fun thing about values too. And this one is also value 3 up here. And then my last little area on this side of the shoe, this looks like a value 3 kind of cuts in over here. So this is my interpretation of this ballerina shoe. So even if we both were to draw ballerina shoes our shoes would look completely different from each other because we each have different eyes and we see things very differently. So that's the beauty of art. We all have our own different interpretation of what we see. Beautiful. All right, so now I'm going to continue exploring my values in my ribbons and in my other shoe. And now it's time for you to explore the values in your shoes. And I will see you for the next step. I will see you for the end of the project. Well, courageous creators, thanks for joining me on this project. And remember, stay creatively curious.